You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday 27th of October 2014. 29 children in Royal Borough identified as possible or actual sexual exploitation victims in 10 months. Child rapist Nasir Ahmed of Rangemore Street jailed for 16 years after police operation in Burton. Homeowners who fail to control Japanese knotweed face criminal prosecution under new anti-social behaviour laws. In West, ISIS finds women eager to enlist. Chinese government does not tolerate Muslim jihad, executes 13 terrorists. KKK outfit warn in Australia Muslim veil protest. Thought for the day, the hitcher, does he have a point? And finally, 2 for 1 day Monday. UK news. 29 children in Royal Borough identified as possible or actual sexual exploitation victims in 10 months. Windsor Council chiefs are warning the number of children identified as at risk of sexual exploitation could increase as more is done to identify victims. Since December, there have been 29 girls aged 13 to 17 identified in the Royal Borough as either being at risk of child sexual exploitation or who have been exploited. In the last 12 months, the Royal Borough and its partners have made a drive to identify and help victims, which means more cases could be recorded as young people come forward and staff mould best practice in identifying potential victims. Speaking at a meeting on Wednesday, David Scott, the Council's Head of Education, Strategy and Commissioning, said, "I think it's safe to say we are at a relatively early stage and we will get a better picture over time." Councillor Phil Bicknell, Cabinet Member for Children's Services, has ordered a full internal audit about all areas of the Council's approach to protecting young people at risk, including looking at taxi licensing and checks on houses of multiple occupancy. World at 8. The Royal Borough has a huge settlement of Muslims in it and the surrounding districts, a fertile breeding ground for Muslim sexual grooming. Child rapist Nasir Ahmed of Rangemore Street jailed for 16 years after police operation in Burton. A Burton man has been caged for 16 years after being found guilty of raping a girl under the age of 13. Nasir Ahmed of Rangemore Street was the 6th and final man jailed for his role in sexual exploitation of the town. The 41-year-old was found guilty of 4 counts of rape of a child under 13 following a hearing of Stafford Crown Court and was also handed 4 years on extended licence. Chief Inspector Steve Mascray, East Staffordshire Local Policing Team Commander, spoke to the Mail following the successful conclusion of the complicated case. World at 8. These sentences are light in comparison for what a Christian would get in Saudi. We need to deport these men and all their relations if found guilty, not feed them for 16 years. We all know most of these abusers and rapists will be let out early for good behaviour, back into the community that spawned them. Homeowners who fail to control Japanese knotweed face criminal prosecution under new anti-social behaviour laws. People who fail to control Japanese knotweed in their gardens can now be prosecuted and fined thousands of pounds for antisocial behaviour according to new Home Office rules. Guidance documents updated this week specifically named the plant alongside Himalayan balsam and giant hogweed as a source of serious problems that new laws can help tackle. Individuals who ignore orders to control Japanese knotweed will have committed a criminal offence and can be fined up to £2,500 according to the guidance. This is the first time such plants have been specifically named in antisocial behaviour guidance and marks a radical departure from the more common targets of intimidation and heavy drinking. Previous environmental legislation has for years threatened fines and even jail for those who plant Japanese knotweed in the wild. World at 8. Oh fine, make Brits pay when the Romas and others let Japanese knotweed flourish in their rented or squatted houses and the local councils do absolutely nothing. The last case of knotweed I pictured was in a hovel rented out by a Roma to a Roma and I passed it to the local council in Kent and nothing was done. European news. In West, ISIS finds women eager to enlist. The young Western Muslims trying to join radical Islamist groups in Syria and Iraq now include increasing numbers of young women who are seeking to fight or become the wives of fighters. It is a new twist on a recruitment effort that has led several thousand men from Europe and beyond to flock to the battlefields. In the past week alone, the authorities reported 2 instances of women and girls trying to get to Syria or take part in jihad. On Wednesday, the British police arrested a 25-year-old woman north of London on suspicion of preparing terrorist acts relating to the fighting in Syria. Over the weekend, 3 teenage girls from the Denver suburbs, 2 sisters of Somali descent and a friend of Sudanese descent, were intercepted as they tried to travel to Syria. Those were the latest in a series of cases of young Muslim women from the West trying to join militant groups like the Nusra Front or the Islamic State, also known as ISIS or ISIL, which is waging a campaign to create a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. The largest numbers of Western recruits have come from France and Britain, but others have come from Austria, Belgium and Spain. For several months the Islamic State has been making a concerted effort to enlist women and girls. It is deploying female recruiters, producing new publications and creating online forums. World at 8. Let them go. They can reproduce all they wish and get killed. Who really cares? The more the merrier. If their families were made to pay or were deported immediately, that might slow the figures down, but they know the West would never do anything as sensible as that. World news. The Chinese government does not tolerate Muslim jihad and executes 13 terrorists. According to China Digital Times and followed by The Independent, 13 people in the Xinjiang region of China were sentenced to death on Monday, just 1 year after 3 other people were executed for a jeep attack in Tiananmen Square. The 13 people from the Uyghur Autonomous Region were executed for terrorism and other violent crimes. The official news agency Xinhua made a public statement about the executions in which it read the following. The 13 people have been found guilty of organising and leading terrorist groups, as well as murder, arson, theft and other crimes, according to the official Xinhua news agency, whose report cited courts in 3 different cities in Xinjiang. The 13 criminals had planned violent terrorist attacks and ruthlessly killed police officers, government officials and civilians, which took innocent lives, caused huge property loss and seriously endangered public security, according to local courts. Xinjiang is the traditional home of the Muslim Uyghurs, who speak a Turkic language. China has previously blamed the Islamist separatists for previous attacks, but it is also known for suppressing the Islamic religion as best they could. International Business Times reports that Muslims will not be allowed to observe the month of Ramadan, meaning fasting is not allowed. Anyone violating the ban will be punished. However, the Muslim Uyghurs are seeking to establish an independent state from China, which they want to call East Turkestan. World at 8. Let them have it. I'm all for people having their own bit of the world, as long as they bloody stay there. If they outbreed their land, they'll have to do something about it. The Chinese do not allow any form of anything other than the Red Code in that country, and they get away with it. KKK outfit worn in Australia, Muslim veil protest. 3 men, one of them wearing a Ku Klux Klan outfit, have tried to enter Parliament House in Canberra. The men are reportedly calling for a nationwide ban on the full-face Islamic veil. One of the 3 was wearing a motorbike helmet and the third had donned a Muslim niqab. Earlier this month, Parliament said anyone visiting the building with their face covered would have to sit in a separate area of the public gallery. That ruling, subsequently overturned, sparked intense national debate about the Islamic veil and about possible discrimination against Muslim women. The 3 men were met by a security official outside the building on Monday morning who told them they could not enter Parliament wearing a helmet or a KKK hood. It seems that you're allowed to wear a full face covering into Parliament if you're a Muslim woman, but no other group is allowed to have that same privilege, one of the men told local media. We as males are not allowed to wear any face coverings in Parliament House. Under Parliament House security rules, Muslim women wearing a burqa or niqab are allowed inside once they have shown their face at the normal security checkpoint. Niqabs are full-length garments where only the eyes are visible, and burqas are also full-length but no part of the face can be seen. World at 8. They do have a point. So-called racist organisations have been pilloried because of their hidden faces, so what is different about the Muslim burqa or niqab? Let them wear it in their own countries, not their adopted countries. I love those pointy hats, and I want one. Thought for the day, the hitcher does he have a point. Gone are the days when I had conversations by email with Peter Hitchens as I joined the BNP, and as an ex-Marxist he would have nothing to do with me after that. I respected that later, but not then. But despite our differences, and even though I have since left that party, I always read his page in the Daily Mail. Now the headline in the Sunday's edition of Don't Make an Islamist Conspiracy Out of a Few Cannabis Crazed Losers is eye-catching. It isn't quite right taking that headline in itself. What is right is the fact that, as he says, all our politicians have spent the last 30 years actively encouraging immigration from Islamic countries, and we are now complaining over the fact that the so-called British Muslims want their own country within our country. What did they expect to happen? Did anyone honestly think in his right mind that a few educated and British-minded Muslims were going to come over, buy into our culture and history, work and pay taxes in British industries that were operating in those days, and pay for private education for their offspring so as not to burden or overcrowd the existing council schools? Did they think for an instant that when hordes of these people came over, bought up entire roads and towns in the Midlands and North, it was going to somehow benefit the British people? You have to remember at about the same time that this massive push of Islamic migration happened, Afghanistan had only just been invaded by the Russians, and the Arab Spring was but a thought, as was 9/11. Muslims were not thought of as a force to be reckoned with by either governments or people. They were just an odd lot with an even odder religion that brought up corner shops and post offices and were always fairly polite. No one gave a thought to them, which is why they've now taken over entire swathes of this country, and it would seem they are like Teflon, untouchable. You have to put this migration problem with the same problem that came about in these times. That is the social engineering of the British population from the establishment and later, of course, the European Union. It was decided to reduce the British and indeed European idea of self-worth, family and self-reliance with home farming and industry, all on a grand scale, because the larger the idea and the more profound the doing of, the less anyone is going to notice, let alone care. And as they say in our Bible, and it came to pass. And of course all brilliantly engineered in cohesion with massive immigration into a small island, which might have proved difficult, but they built the channel with the help from the French, who of course didn't want migrants staying in France as they had enough of them already. So it provided a perfect storm for the remnants of the unwanted people of an unwanted and relatively unknown religion. Previous history and troubles with Islam appeared to have been forgotten. Arab slavers, Ottoman empires reaching the gates of Vienna, being chucked out of Spain along with the Jews, the troubles with partitions in India, and the fact that looking at even fairly recent history, where Islam lurked, trouble bedded alongside it very nicely, thank you. But did our politicians take notice? No. Because at the same time diversity and racism were rearing their very useful heads. The 60s had passed in a whiff of cannabis and do-gooders and peace lovers who had never had their peace threatened, and a universal dislike of authority and discipline, and what better way to fight those things that were considered old-fashioned and evil? Peace and love, man, peace and love. The old and true mantra of you don't get peace without a gun having passed many of these idiots by. So the stage was set for the plan. Reduce the European population by introducing the pill, and as everyone was screwing their heads off and didn't want the burden of babies, as they were considered at that stage a thorough nuisance and not the fashion accessory they became in later years, the pill was big business. It also led men to being more promiscuous and not taking care, and girls being just plain stupid. It wasn't the age of Aquarius or true love, it was the age of complete and total ignorance. Then of course AIDS made its appearance and of course has still not gone away and vies with Ebola on the African continent to kill as many as it can. Now sexual mores are not my bag. I frankly couldn't care less who does what, with whom or when. But looking at the downfall of civilization in the eye, you have to admit the two go hand in hand. Somehow we've wandered from a puritanical stance to that of complete hedonism that must have had its day in Sodom and Gomorrah. When Russell Brand, who should be shot, is standing as mayor for London, then forget it. He looks like he should be standing on a gay pride float that's seen its best days. I'm not going into the decimation of our British farming and fishing communities and the giving away of our waters and our rights as people to farm and fish where we have always done in the methods we have always employed. Take into account the selling off of our steel, wool and cotton industries and the fact we send our foodstuffs to the Far East to be repacked, and you're entering the world of the criminally insane. The perfect Islamic storm is already almost there. Take into account the massive amount of money that we owe China for the in reality sheer crap of what they send to us by the container load. Dangerous cosmetics, badly dyed and from God knows where clothing, settees which make you itch, toys which are time bombs and silly flat identikit shoes which suit little flat peasant feet more than large European ones and more. And we owe them money. We could and did make all these things better in the UK than they, as indeed prior to us taking in millions from the third world, we were relatively self-sufficient as far as food and housing goes. Now of course, with all the numbers increasing due to their birth rates, we will have to pay more for both in the future, which is unnatural in the scheme of things, but very well planned by the powers that were. In the ensuing years we did things that no other country has ever or will ever do. We have all become whores, and I mean that in a political sense. There is no true freedom of thought or speech in the UK anymore, unless you speak for Islam, the other ethnics, the disabled, the dying, or the generally odd, or the diverse as we like to say. The odder the cause, the better it will be accepted, and this suits Islam very well. Diversity because they are diverse, and racism because they are usually of a different race to us Brits. Anything they do or say that one takes exception to comes under the anti-racist laws that we adopted from the EU. So there's virtually nothing that can be said or done, whatever they may do, because it's against the law. Try that one for size and tell me we aren't completely balmy. The stage is now set for a very well established and supposedly peace-loving and huge Muslim presence in this country. I cannot include Europe in this one as they have their own methods of dealing with it, one hopes. But as Hitchens says, we've done it all ourselves. A simple non-immigration policy many years ago would have solved all our problems now, or at least most of them. Larger countries than us have non-immigration policies in place forever, but that doesn't apply to their citizens wandering all over the face of the earth and coming to us to rest. Now they're just talking of capping it and looking into the illegals problem. Too bloody late, mate. But back to the Muslims. Now they have their second Mecca, England, and all without a whisper or a flurry of protests. Even with the awful and lately proclaimed sexual groomings which are 99.9% carried out by men from the Muslim communities, we are still quiet. We put aside the killing in broad daylight of Lee Rigby as payback for the West's activities in certain Muslim countries and leave it at that. Even 9/11 has been examined and explained. We seem to have taken the overtaking and overbreeding of our migrants as the norm, when in fact it is anything but. But then we have had various governments and political bodies and media who have all instilled in most of us an acceptance and submission worthy of the name of Islam itself. So in a way Hitchens is right. We have sown the seeds which have taken root. But farmers can always clear a field and right a wrong, can't they? They can re-sow and glean what they want to reap. That is the nature of countries and people. Time has shown that nothing lasts forever, and man-made is not necessarily well-made. The GBP have accepted everything: loss of patriotism, loss of land, loss of history and religion, loss of free will and thought, loss of family and kin, loss of jobs and industries, loss of their children's futures, and loss of self-worth. Does any government in their right mind think that with all that loss it can be replaced by building a mosque down the road or carting a jihadi off to jail? The Muslims might think so, but you and I, we know different, don't we? And finally, 2 for 1 Day Monday. A man was driving down the road and ran out of gas. Just at that moment a bee flew in his window. The bee said, "What seems to be the problem?" "I'm out of gas," the man replied. The bee told the man to wait there and flew away. Minutes later the man watched as an entire swarm of bees flew to his car and into his gas tank. After a few minutes the bees flew out. "Try it now," said one bee. The man turned the ignition key and the car started right up. "Wow!" the man exclaimed. "What did you put in my gas tank?" The bee answered, wait for it, you're gonna love this. BP! As in British Petroleum. And a nun died and went of course up to heaven. At the gates she was met by Gabriel with a large wad of papers under his arm. He led her to a large white desk and motioned her to sit down. She asked him why she wasn't allowed past the pearly gates. He replied, referencing his notes, that she was a special case. She had lived but a short life, but a good one, and as such she was entitled under the rules of heaven that she would be able to go back to earth as anyone she wanted, famous or infamous, and live their lives until she died once again. He adjusted his specs and asked her what she wanted to be in her second life chance. She thought long and hard and said, "I want to be Sarah Pippolini." Gabriel looked at her and said, "I'll have to check up on this one. Don't you want to be someone famous and rich?" "No," said the nun, "I want to be Sarah Pippolini." "OK," said Gabe, "just let me look at my celestial notes on my celestial computer and see who she is." He looked through his worldly references and muttered, then turned to the nun. He said, "I can't find anyone called Sarah Pippolini. Are you sure of the name?" "Yup," said the nun. He checked again. He took off his specs and turned to her and said, "Are you sure you don't mean the Sahara pipeline?" The nun looked at him and said, "Well, I don't know. All I know is that she got laid by 250 men in 3 hours, and that seems bloody OK to me." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.